My boss thought he could take my idea, slap his name on it, and cash in like I was just another disposable employee. He had no clue I'd been one step ahead the whole time, and that his empire would crumble because of me. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. Now let's get into it. My name's Lena, and for as long as I can remember, I've been someone who throws herself completely into her work. I wasn't born into money or privilege, but I always believed creativity and grit could take me places. After graduating, I landed a spot at a mid-sized marketing firm that had a reputation for being competitive, but full of opportunities if you played your cards right. I thought I'd finally found the perfect place to prove myself. At first, I admired my boss, Martin Hale. He had this smooth-talking confidence that made everyone around him believe he was the smartest guy in the room. The higher-ups adored him, clients ate out of his hand, and co-workers practically tripped over themselves to stay on his good side. He had this way of walking into a meeting like he already owned the outcome. I'll admit, a part of me was impressed, maybe even a little inspired. But that admiration didn't last long. The more I worked under him, the more I noticed cracks in the image he worked so hard to project. His charm wasn't backed by substance. It was built on borrowing, or rather stealing, from the people around him. He'd lean on junior employees for their best ideas, dress them up as his own, and then bask in the applause like he was some genius innovator. And because he had such a polished reputation, no one ever questioned it. Still, I kept my head down, telling myself that if I worked hard enough, my talent would eventually speak for itself. I wanted to believe I could rise on my own merit. I stayed late, brainstormed solutions no one else thought of, and poured myself into every project like it had my name written all over it. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the unease building in me. There was something in the way Martin smiled whenever I brought him new concepts, something calculating, like he was already figuring out how to twist them into his advantage. I didn't know it then, but I was walking straight into a betrayal that would change everything. The nights in the office were long and quiet, the kind where the hum of the vending machine and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights became my only companions. While most of my coworkers shut their laptops at 5 and rushed out the door, I stayed behind, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, sketching diagrams on whiteboards, and tinkering with spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. I wasn't just filling time. I was building something that felt bigger than any project I had ever touched before. The idea came to me after months of listening to clients complain about rising costs and waste. What if packaging wasn't just another expense, but part of a sustainable cycle? What if companies could subscribe to a system where materials were recycled, returned, and reused, cutting costs while boosting their green image? The more I pieced it together, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a pitch. It was a business model that could change how companies approached their branding and operations. I poured myself into it, tweaking every detail until it worked. The numbers lined up, the logistics made sense, and even the branding had a polished edge. It wasn't just theoretical. It was realistic, marketable, and ready to launch. For weeks, I kept refining it, convinced that this could be my breakthrough moment at the firm. When I finally felt ready, I gathered up my notes, polished the presentation slides, and walked into Martin's office. He leaned back in his chair as I laid it all out. Every chart, every strategy, every reason this idea could not just succeed but thrive. I watched his expression shift as I spoke. At first, he looked curious, then impressed, and by the time I finished, he was smiling. "This is sharp, Lena," he said, tapping his pen against the desk. "You really thought this through." His tone carried that smooth charm he always used, but something about the way he lingered on my slides made me uneasy. Still, I wanted to believe him. When I asked if I should prepare it for the client presentation next week, he shook his head. "Not yet. Let's hold off. Timing is everything." It confused me. I had been certain this was the perfect opportunity, but he brushed it aside so casually, as if the work could wait. I told myself he knew what he was doing, that maybe he had a bigger plan I couldn't see. So I trusted him. I closed my laptop, left his office, and carried on, never realizing that handing him those drafts would be the first mistake in a storm I didn't see coming. The conference room was packed, the kind of meeting where every executive wanted to be seen at the table. I sat near the end, notebook open, ready to observe. The client was seated across from Martin, expectant and eager. As he stood to begin the presentation, I noticed the familiar title slide flash across the screen. My stomach sank. The colors, the layout, even the phrasing, it was mine. Slide after slide, he walked them through the model I had built from scratch. The subscription structure, the cost-saving projections, the environmental benefits. Every detail I had labored over was flowing from his mouth like he had crafted it himself. He even used my exact phrasing in spots, words I remembered agonizing over late at night. The reaction was instant. The client leaned forward, nodding with excitement. Executives whispered to each other, impressed. Applause broke out as Martin wrapped up, shaking hands, accepting compliments, and promising more refinements in the weeks to come. I clapped weakly, my hands numb, my chest tight. I wanted to stand up and say something, anything, but my voice stayed locked inside me. My work had been stolen in plain sight, and the room treated him like a visionary. I sat frozen, invisible, my contributions erased in a matter of minutes. When the meeting ended and people began filing out, Martin caught my eye. He lingered behind until the last person left, then strolled over to me with a smile that made my blood boil. "That's how the game is played," he said smoothly, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Stick with me and you'll learn." The smugness in his tone hit harder than the theft itself. He wasn't hiding it, wasn't even ashamed. To him, this was normal. I realized in that moment he had never planned to credit me, never intended to let me shine. All that time I had spent trusting him, believing he wanted the team to succeed, was nothing but a setup for his own gain. I sat there gripping my pen so tightly it almost snapped, forcing myself not to let the fury show. Outwardly, I stayed quiet, but inside something hardened. This wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was betrayal that cut deeper than I expected. I knew then I couldn't let it go. The deal closed faster than anyone expected. Contracts were signed, handshakes exchanged, and the office buzzed with celebration. The client couldn't stop praising the brilliance of the concept, promising long-term partnership and millions in revenue. The firm treated it like a landmark victory, the kind that secured careers and elevated reputations. And at the center of it all stood Martin, basking in the spotlight that rightfully should have been mine. Emails poured in from upper management congratulating him on his innovative vision. He was called into executive meetings, invited to exclusive dinners, and eventually rewarded with a hefty bonus. People toasted him in the break room, raising glasses to his so-called genius, while I stood on the sidelines, clapping with a hollow smile that hid the storm brewing inside me. When I expected acknowledgement, I got reassignment. Martin pulled me aside casually one morning, telling me my skills would be better utilized handling background tasks. He said it like he was doing me a favor, stripping me of creative responsibility and pushing me into the shadows. Suddenly, my calendar filled with scheduling duties, data entry, and research no one else wanted to do. The same people who once leaned on me for fresh ideas now treated me like an assistant. Each day that passed, the weight of betrayal pressed heavier. I had poured months into building something groundbreaking, only to watch my efforts fuel someone else's rise. My name wasn't mentioned in the client reports, not even in passing. It was as if I had never contributed at all. Sitting at my desk, staring at spreadsheets that meant nothing, I felt a mix of anger and despair gnawing at me. There were moments I hovered over job postings, tempted to walk away and never look back. The thought of starting fresh was appealing, but the reality of bills and rent kept me rooted in place. I couldn't afford to leave, not without another offer lined up. So I stayed, swallowing my pride, trying to endure the humiliation. Every laugh I overheard from Martin's office, every compliment I heard passed his way, carved deeper into me. He had not only stolen my work, he had taken away my sense of worth in the place I once believed could be my stepping stone. I felt trapped, invisible, and powerless, yet somewhere under all that hurt, a quiet resolve began to form. I needed someone to hear how betrayed I felt without turning it into a spectacle, so I dragged Callie into a quiet corner of the office cafe and let it spill out. She listened, eyebrows arched, coffee forgotten, while I described the pitch, the applause, and how my work vanished into thin air. She didn't offer cliches or empty sympathy. Instead, she leaned in with that fierce, practical glare she gets when someone's being wronged. "You can't let him make a habit of this," Callie said, voice low but sharp. She tapped the table as if punctuating a contract. "If he copies you once, he'll do it again and again. Make him regret thinking he could get away with it." Her words landed with the weight of truth. It wasn't vengeance for vengeance's sake. She framed it like self-preservation. That hit me harder than any insult Martin had thrown my way. After that conversation, I stopped broadcasting my frustration and started mapping possibilities. I didn't want a public meltdown. I wanted leverage. So I began to plan in silence. During lunch breaks and quiet evenings, I sketched improvements, tightened the operational flow, and mapped potential partners. The refinements weren't just cosmetic. I reworked supply logistics, added measurable impact metrics, and designed a scalable subscription cadence that made the idea harder to mimic. Most important, I fortified the concept legally. I booked consultations with a small IP attorney recommended by a friend, learned the basics of provisional protection, and prepared documentation that tied the model explicitly to me. I kept copies, timestamps, and versions, an audit trail that would be undeniable if anyone tried to claim ownership. It felt tedious at first, but the paperwork gave me a kind of armor. Evenings turned into labors of focus. While the office emptied and the lights dimmed, I reopened files Martin had seen and rewired them into something more robust. I integrated feedback loops, tested pricing scenarios, and mocked up a tighter brand narrative. Callie kept checking in, sometimes with snacks, sometimes with spreadsheets, and her steady confidence made the late nights bearable. I didn't entertain confrontation. I refused melodrama. Instead, I cultivated readiness, proof, polish, and a plan that would protect the work where it mattered most. The more I prepared, the less powerless I felt. What began as anger shifted into strategy, and under that practical energy, a new resolve took shape. I was no longer just someone whose idea had been taken. I was preparing to own what was mine, with evidence and momentum behind me. When the time came, I'd reveal not just a polished product, but a complete, protected system that proved authorship beyond dispute. And I would do it on my terms. And loudly. I started reaching out cautiously, using professional networking events and industry mixers as my cover. I needed someone outside the firm who understood the market, but wasn't tangled up in office politics. That's how I met David Mercer, sharp, observant, and known for spotting potential where others overlooked it. I didn't spill everything at once. I let him see pieces of my concept, just enough to spark interest, always careful not to expose my hand too early. When the conversation turned serious, I unveiled the full version of the model I had rebuilt after Martin's theft. Every element was tighter, more market-ready, and crucially protected under my name. I showed the documentation, patents, provisional trademarks, dated drafts, and explained the subscription structure, the operational plan, and how it addressed client pain points. David leaned back, eyebrows raised, clearly impressed. "This is more than solid," he said, flipping through my notes. "It's actionable, scalable, and it's yours. You want my backing?" Hearing that, a weight lifted. I had someone in my corner who could help turn months of work into reality, and this time the credit couldn't be stolen. I agreed, careful to outline terms that gave me ownership and control, ensuring that every detail tied back to me. Meanwhile, I maintained the facade at the office. I laughed at Martin's jokes, nodded during his briefings, and pretended to be disheartened by my reassignment. No one suspected the hours I spent outside the office, drafting, refining, and coordinating with David. I kept spreadsheets, prototypes, and presentations under lock and key, each iteration closer to launch. Every interaction with David reinforced my confidence. His insight helped me identify weaknesses I hadn't noticed, and his network opened doors I couldn't reach alone. I began scheduling timelines, plotting a debut that would make it impossible for Martin to claim any credit. At the same time, I stayed in the shadows at the firm, quietly observing, feeding him minor drafts he could think he controlled, while all the meaningful development moved forward with David. I was building a double life, one for appearances, one for execution. The trap was being set carefully, methodically, and I felt a thrill each time I crossed off another step toward the moment when all the pieces would fall into place. Martin had no idea I was watching him as closely as he was watching me. He strutted through the office like a king surveying his kingdom, sprinkling little digs and casual remarks, comments about my slower pace or the charm of his own ideas. He seemed to believe I was beaten, reduced to a background player, and the arrogance in his posture only fueled my quiet resolve. He began assigning me additional projects, framing them as opportunities to contribute to the bigger picture. I recognized the pattern immediately. These were not chances for growth. They were drafts for him to polish and present as his own. Each new assignment carried the same trap: deadlines, pressure, and the implicit expectation that I'd hand over my creativity for his gain. Instead of panicking, I learned to camouflage my effort. I delivered results, yes, but deliberately watered down or flawed enough to keep him satisfied, yet incapable of fully capitalizing on them. Charts missing a key metric, wording off by a phrase here and there, mock-ups slightly unpolished. Enough to maintain the illusion of competence without giving him ammunition for true success. I became a careful performer, playing the role he expected, while guarding the real work that mattered most. Every day was a balancing act. Fear not at me. What if my plan collapsed? What if I miscalculated? Or what if David's support fell through? The pressure felt suffocating at times, the office a cage of expectations and pretense. But alongside that tension, a flicker of anticipation grew stronger with every cautious step. I started timing my tasks, prioritizing which pieces to show him and which to hide, measuring every word I spoke and every slide I shared. The thrill of secrecy, the sense that I held power he would never suspect, gave me energy. It was addictive, like preparing for a storm while everyone else remained oblivious to the clouds forming overhead. I could see it. The moment was approaching when months of planning and late nights would pay off. The thrill of turning the tables, of finally stepping out from his shadow, pulsed through me with every guarded smile I offered him, every half-hearted draft I handed over. Behind the calm exterior, excitement surged. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was orchestrating a reckoning, and it was coming soon. The expo hall buzzed with energy, booths gleaming under bright lights, banners announcing innovations, and executives moving quickly between presentations. I stood beside David at our corner, nerves coiling in my stomach, but steady determination anchoring me. Months of planning, legal filings, and refinements led to this single moment, our launch, fully under my name. As the first visitors approached, I noticed a familiar figure weaving through the crowd. Martin, flanked by his usual entourage, was there with the firm's display, beaming as if the industry already belonged to him. I forced myself to keep breathing, to stay composed. He had no idea I'd arrived with the version that surpassed his imitation in every way. Clients started stopping at our booth, curious about the subscription system and impressed by the interactive demo. When I explained the improvements, optimized logistics, integrated sustainability tracking, real-time reporting, they leaned in, asking detailed questions and taking notes. Competitors whispered to each other, clearly comparing what we were showing to what they had seen at other booths, and the realization dawned on many. This was the authentic model. Martin glanced over, his confident smile faltering as more people circled our display, engaging directly with me and David. He tried to draw attention back to his booth, but the buzz had shifted. Clients approached him awkwardly, hesitating, glancing at our materials and comparing them to his version. Their questions revealed that his product lacked key features, missing optimizations that made ours superior. I could feel a quiet satisfaction building as I guided demonstrations, showing functionalities Martin never imagined, highlighting efficiency gains and sustainability metrics he had never implemented. Every impressed nod, every appreciative comment reinforced the truth. This was my creation, perfected and protected. By the time the event was in full swing, the pattern was clear. Our booth was packed, inquiries were flooding in, and Martin's team was struggling to maintain interest. His polished slides and confident pitch couldn't compete with the tangible, well-executed solution I presented. The revelation was unmistakable. My work, my vision, my effort, fully realized and undeniable. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The copycat narrative he'd relied on had collapsed. In that crowded expo hall, amid flashing lights and eager professionals, the truth was visible for all to see. I was the creator, and nothing he had done could overshadow that fact. By midday, Martin's booth had transformed from confident swagger to visible panic. The clients who had approached him earlier were now circling back to ours, questioning details, comparing notes, and realizing that the features he claimed as his own were either missing or poorly executed. Deals that once seemed certain slipped away in real time. Signatures delayed, calls canceled, and murmurs spreading across the expo floor. Word traveled fast. Industry insiders, competitors, and journalists whispered in corners, sharing observations that his pitch had borrowed heavily from another source. By late afternoon, plagiarism had become the quiet buzz accompanying his every move. Even employees from other firms approached us to confirm details, eyes wide with disbelief at how easily Martin's version had been unmasked. Back at the office, the fallout hit like a storm. Senior executives called emergency meetings, reviewing contracts, presentations, and internal communications. Questions flew about credibility, oversight, and accountability. The firm's reputation, carefully cultivated over years, trembled under the weight of the revelation. Martin's previous triumphs now seemed hollow, the applause replaced with doubt. Finally, when the chaos quieted for a moment, I found him alone in a seldom-used conference room. His posture was rigid, the confident mask finally slipping. I didn't need to yell or accuse. Silence carried its own power. I looked him squarely in the eyes and said, "You told me that's how the game is played. Looks like I learned faster than you thought." The words hit harder than any meeting, any confrontation. For a fraction of a second, he seemed to register the depth of his miscalculation. Months of planning, deception, and arrogance had crumbled under the weight of preparation and persistence. The office he had treated as his stage was no longer under his control. The narrative he had crafted so carefully was unraveling. In that private confrontation, I didn't gloat or revel in vengeance. I simply stated the truth, the undeniable fact that he had underestimated me. And in the silence that followed, I realized that the shift had already occurred. Power, recognition, and respect were no longer his to wield. The industry had seen the truth, and I had reclaimed what was always mine. By the end of the week, the consequences hit with finality. Martin's position at the firm was terminated, the announcement curt and professional, leaving little room for debate. Whispers of his unethical behavior spread quickly throughout the industry, and invitations to partnerships or speaking engagements vanished almost overnight. Colleagues and competitors alike now treated his name with caution, and the networks he had once navigated effortlessly became closed doors. His reputation, once a carefully polished image, lay in ruins. Meanwhile, David and I focused on bringing our venture into full operation. We finalized contracts, established partnerships, and built a team that shared our vision. Every client meeting, every pitch, and every strategy session reinforced the truth that this business was ours entirely, born from the work I had protected and refined. I officially became co-founder, no longer just the creative mind behind a concept, but a leader shaping its direction and growth. I often found moments to pause and reflect, sitting in the office late at night with the soft hum of activity around me. Satisfaction didn't come as a rush of triumph or shouting victory. It settled quietly, like a weight lifted off my chest. Revenge had been about more than seeing Martin falter. It was about reclaiming the respect, credit, and authority that had been denied to me. The control he assumed over my work had been an illusion. I had quietly rewritten the ending on my own terms. Looking around at what we had built, I realized how far I had come, from the frustration of being sidelined to leading a project fully my own. The lessons, the late nights, and the careful strategy all converged into a sense of calm achievement. No one else's validation was necessary. The proof was in the success we were creating. He stole my idea thinking he could control me. What he didn't realize was, I'd already built a future without him in it. Do you think I handled it the right way by taking control of my work and leaving him behind, or should I have confronted him differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your opinion.